All right, good morning. Can everyone hear me? Because I'm not sure if the microphone is working or not. I'm Lynette Chappelle-Williams. I'm Cornell's Associate Vice President for Inclusion and Workforce Diversity. Delighted that you are here. I want to do the housekeeping part first. The first thing is in terms of the restrooms. This way is the women's restrooms. Over this way is the men's restroom. I also want to make sure that everyone silenced their phones at this point. And the last thing is we have actually reserved a room over here to the left. So if you have a business matter that you need to tend to, feel free to go over there to take care of whatever business that you need to. So it is clear to all of us that women are contributing in unprecedented ways to the military mission of defending the nation. This was a statement from former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta as support for the Pentagon's lifting the ban on women serving in combat. Women have made significant contributions in the military and have the potential for contributing to the missions and the goals of our organizations. And today's program is designed to make this a reality. I want to welcome all of you to the Roundtable. We're going to be focusing on a couple of issues. One is in terms of the challenges that are facing women veterans as they are leaving the military for civilian careers. We'll also have a discussion on what the best practices are that employers can utilize to increase the success in the recruitment and retention of women veterans, as well as how we can create more inclusive work climates for these individuals. I also want to welcome those who are joining us via live stream. Women did not officially serve in the U.S. military until the Army and Navy Nurse Corps was established in 1901 and 1908, respectively. However, since that time, women make up an increasingly larger population of the military. During the Vietnam War era, women made up 3% of the military, but that number has increased sixfold today. More than 206,000 women have served in the Middle East since March of 2003, most in Iraq. Despite the increasing numbers, women veterans continue to experience challenges. In 2008, a RAND study found that women veterans are suffering double the rates of depression and post-traumatic stress disorder than their male counterparts. The National Coalition for Homeless Veterans estimated that the number of female veterans on the streets more than doubled from 2006 to 2010. Providing viable employment opportunities for women veterans as they seek civilian careers can have a positive impact on reversing these trends. So Cornell University is delighted to host this dialogue today on changing these trends by increasing the number of women veterans in our workforces. We have a number of distinguished individuals here who will help us navigate this issue. Mary McAdams, our keynote, is a retired U.S. Navy captain who has successfully moved from the military to the civilian workforce. She will share the challenges she experienced, as well as give her perspective in terms of what employers can consider when employing women veterans. Our first panel, right after the keynote, will focus on challenges facing veterans moving from the military to civilian careers. And we have Jordana Malik from the Department of Veteran Affairs, as well as Professor Brian Leedy, who is the principal investigator for the military projects in Cornell's Bronfenbrenner Center for Translational Research. Our second panel will turn our focus to the best practices in the recruitment, retention, and climate for women veterans. Maureen Casey from J.P. Morgan Chase and Dr. Kenneth Matos from Families and Work Institute will help us understand these best practices. Renee Bobb, who is affiliated with the National Association for Women Veterans, which is an organization that was formed in 1990 to advocate for all women veterans, and is a former telecommunications operator with the U.S. Navy, will moderate both of our panels. In addition to a number of women veterans from Cornell's workforce, we have several people here to help us with this dialogue. Trier Lynn Bryan, who's a former Air Force IT support chief and now an associate with Goldman Sachs, has joined us. In addition, Nora Benzahal and retired Lieutenant General David Barno, both senior fellows and co-directors of the Responsible Defense Program at the Center for New American Security, have also joined us today. And I am absolutely delighted that Dawn Seymour, a Cornell alum from the class of '39 and one of the, quote, lucky 13 women Air Force service pilots who completed training on the B-17, is also here with us, and she will introduce a video on the Cornell women veterans at the conclusion of our lunch. After the panel presentations, all of you will have an opportunity to participate in one of two think tank discussions. One will address the recruitment and retention of women veterans, and the other one will be focusing on creating an inclusive climate for women veterans. During these think tanks, we will brainstorm some creative solutions to improve the number of work experiences for our women veterans. The information generated from these think tanks will be captured by one of our Cornell students, Rebecca Jung, who will take this information as well as her own research and create a white paper that will be shared with other individuals and organizations who are also interested in addressing the employment interest of women veterans. I would be remiss if I didn't thank two organizations who have made today's event possible. One is the President's Council of Cornell Women, and the other is the Cornell University Diversity Council through a Toward New Destinations grant. Both are funding today's roundtable. I also want to thank the three organizations who have coordinated today's event: the Cornell Library, the Cornell School of Hotel Administration, and Cornell's Department of Human Resources and Safety Services, in addition to our Cornell Veteran Colleague Network group. And so now I want to begin our program. After graduation from Office Candidate School, retired Navy Captain Mary McAdams joined the U.S. Navy, where she held officer positions in areas including IT and recruiting. Most recently, Captain McAdams was an instructor for senior naval science for the Navy Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps, with responsibility for the curriculum at Stevenson High School and Southwest DeKalb in Georgia. She attended the Armed Forces Staff College, received a BS in biology from South Carolina State University, obtained a Master of Science in Information Sciences at the Naval Postgraduate School, completed an advanced management program at Harvard Business School, we won't hold that against you, and is currently completing an EDD program in adult education at the University of Georgia. Please join me in welcoming Captain Mary McAdams.
Is it still morning? Good morning. Good morning. All right, that's the recruiter part of me. Morning. Okay, so how do I get to my brief? Somebody needs to tell me how to get to. It's on the desktop.
Is it her presentation? Okay, the person who knows
is coming up. While she's coming up, I just want to thank everyone for participating, and this is just a great opportunity. When my cousin Renetta said, "Hey, you were in the military, we're going to do this Veterans Roundtable," I go, "Yeah, but I know a lot of people who are much more important than I am that would be much better to do this presentation." And so when I talked to Lynette says, no, you're really the type of person we're looking for. And I go, when somebody tells you that, you kind of wonder what I really have to offer that they're really looking for. But what she told me was, we're looking for someone who has transitioned out of the military, because I was offering her people that were still in the military, like Admiral Howard, who will be here in a couple of days, right? She says, no, we're looking for someone who has come out of the military. I go, okay, I can do that. And what I wanted to let her know was that it's an opportunity to tell what I have done, but it's also an opportunity for you to ask me questions, because sometimes you don't really know what people want to know, but you know that information. So as I go through, if there is something that I don't cover that you would like to know, please stop me and I will see if I can't answer that. So it says service boots to civilian shoes. So I almost, you don't think I'm loud enough? Okay. You can hear me?
The far end audience.
You
Far
can
end
hear me?
audience. You can't yell down a wire, so it's okay.
They're just gonna hear my.
Come around and we can just put that there, as long as you don't run away.
Oh, no, I will run away.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I'm try not to run away. So, what I was saying was, it is important that we talk about these issues because we don't know that we've experienced them until we start reflecting, right? That's something they tell us to do, is we should sit and reflect. And so when I was putting together this brief, this talk, I go, wow, I did all of that? That happened to me? Well, it is important to discuss what happened to women and what happened to military people when they transitioned to civilian world. But I am just going to talk about my experience and what I saw as a military person transitioning out of the military. So I was thinking that service boots to civilian shoes, for me, it would probably sound more like service pumps to civilian heels, right? You see, I used to do this. If you see the shoes I have on, I am just so happy that I can wear a pair of nice heels, because in the military, all of us who are in the military, they're women, they told us exactly what to wear, right? They told us exactly how it had to look, how it could be, how it could not be, right? And how we could wear our hair. So my hair is short now, but that's because I'm old and they tell me I look younger with it short. But when I was young, I wanted to wear it long, but the military will not let you do that. They will not let you wear your hair long and slinging every which way, okay? But that is what we're going to talk about today. What is different once we transition out of the military into the civilian world? So, how did I get from that to this is what I want to talk about. Transitioning, what does that mean to us? What is the military process? What was my experience? What was my recruiting process? And my background is recruiting. I don't know if you heard that when Lynette was talking. I really have 12 years of recruiting experience from the military viewpoint. Retention process. I did a lot of retaining in the military because why recruit if you're just going to send them out the door, right? So we talked a lot about retention, but I'm going to talk today about recruiting process that I went through, what I looked at as retention resources, and then I'm going to talk about the military culture and the new culture that you're going into. So, this is how I felt when I transitioned out. With the waterfall effect. It was like, oh, my stars. I'm moving out of something I'm so used to. I spent 30 and a half years in the military. And transitioning out felt like that. It felt like when you get a new job and you transition to that job and they tell you everything you need to know about that job in like what, an hour, 2 hours a day? All right, so this was going to be the rest of my life though, right? It felt like the waterfall. It was just like all rushing in on me. But here's the good thing about that. Okay, hopefully I can get this to show. Okay, you see these smooth rocks on the side? Because at one point, all the water was all over here, right? And I reminded myself that I may have some jagged edges, but I am smooth underneath. And I knew what I knew, and I was confident in what I knew. So I knew I could do this process of moving out, even though I felt it was overwhelming at the time. So I'm also going to talk about the military process if you're less than 20 years, the military process for more than 20 years, and then my process. So I have been out 8 years. What I will say as far as the process right here, it could change. It probably has changed, but I will tell you what I know it to be when I was coming out, and there are people in here that are in active duty. Colonel Barber over there, and he can kind of help me out if I get it wrong. Because he'll tell you the Army perspective, and the Navy perspective is probably a little bit different. But. So, here's what you feel like. You're roaming out here, you got all of this vast opportunities, right? And it's all green, and you're just thinking, oh, my stars, I got all of this stuff I can offer to the world. And here's where you're trying to get to. This is the goal, these mountain tops that you've got to get over or you got to get to, right? but you're roaming out here with these vast opportunities that you believe are available to you when you transition out. So the military has workshops. They have workshops if you are just transitioning out. They have workshops if you are retiring. So when I use the word transition, it probably will mean in this talk retiring and leaving before you retire, because in the military, we would never like to say that we are retiring. We would like to say that we are transitioning. We never want to lose that bond that we've built with the military. We always want to have our sailors come back and give back to the military in some way, in some affinity group. So whenever we retire, we never say we are retiring or we're leaving the military. We're like transitioning into a new phase in our life, but the military is our foundation, it's our roots. But you go through different workshops. We have workshops to help people transition out. But the other thing we have is the personnel office, and the thing that I didn't put up there was the medical office. You are going to go through a checkout process. So you are not going to miss anything, supposedly, when you transition out of the military. So the process is there have people, you're in a room like this, and they're talking to you about your transitioning. They're talking to you about your retirement benefits. They're talking to you about your medical benefits. They're talking to you about how you're going to get a job, how to interview, how to get a resume done. And you're just going, oh, my stars. Maybe I'll just stay in. Maybe I'll go call my detailer and I'll see if I can get another position. But they ask you to do this 5 years out and then 2 years out if you're retiring. If you're transitioning, a lot of the process is different, but there are tools still available to us. What I found is the realities and the challenges. Do you have time to do that? Do you have the time to still transition out of your job and do the workshops, go to personnel, do medical? Well, if you don't have the time, you're going to do it. So you need to figure out how to balance your time. But I think what I found personally for myself is that giving myself time to do these things was not acceptable. Now, that's me. Everybody's not me. But to find that time, I still wanted to do my military job, and I still wanted to do what was in that first bullet, that military process. So I think that's a female thing. I don't know if it's a male thing, but we just tend to try to have all of these balls flying around in the air around us, right? Because we can do it all. We know we can. We just don't know what the results is going to be on the other side. You know, when we're trying to get here to the mountain, right? Because we're right here. And we see a lot of vast opportunities, but we really want to get here to the mountaintop, right? But we figure we can do it. And then I talk about cross purposes. What are those cross purposes? It's family. It is, what does your husband want? What do your children want? Where do they want to live? Then you start talking about your son or your daughter. They want you to live in a certain place, right? And you want to get a job there because you want to please your family, right? You're the woman, you're the provider, you're the nurturer, you want to please. But those are the cross purposes that you're looking at as you transition out. But the big one is the financial piece. Don't let anybody fool you. If you can't financially transition out of the military without causing yourself harm, you have not done your homework. You have not planned. And I think the ones of us who do it fairly well have always saved at some point during our military career. Maybe not the whole 30 years, maybe 20 years, maybe 10 years, but we have been taught how to save. When we start in the military, when I was in officer candidate school, they taught us about saving. They also taught us something called some general orders that I can't even repeat to you right now. But at the time, I knew them. And the first one was your military health and safety. But the other ones talked about walking your post in a military manner. But when your lieutenant pulled you aside, they also talked about, you know, we have a savings process that you need to have money going into a savings bond, or you need to have a bank account. And what I didn't tell you all was that I came from the rural part of South Carolina. My parents probably did not have a bank account. I don't even know. I don't remember ever learning how to write a check. I don't ever remember them telling me about a bank account, right? But I was told that at officer candidate school, and that was an awesome thing. I was told to take care of my health. I was told to take care of my finances. If you can't take care of your finances, when you start transitioning out, there's this thought process that your retirement or any bonuses that you're going to get because you are transitioning before you retire will take care of you. But that's not always the case. So financial resources do matter and how well you plan to use them. And then what you don't know. I was talking to Renee yesterday when we met in the airport in Detroit. And what you don't know can sometimes hurt you because sometimes you don't realize. I knew I was a veteran, right? Because I was retiring after 20 years and I had been through some wars, right? But there are a lot of people that get out that they don't know that they are a veteran, that they can use the services that are available to them, and that there are people there that are willing to sit down and help them with their vices or with their great things. So my vices applications, I hate them with a passion. Give me an application and I'm just like, oh my stars, this is going to take me forever. But when I went to the VA office, I sat down with a person in there and they walked me through everything. They told me what I needed to put in every block because I am a detailed-oriented person, and I do not ever want to answer a question incorrectly and then have to go back and change it. I want to get it right the first time. And sometimes when you go online, that's a great way to do it, right, because it explains everything. But then you have questions. So what you don't know can hurt you, but it also is a process out there to help you. And the VA really has a lot of resources that are available to us when we are transitioning out either before 20 years or after 20 years that we need to take advantage of. I was also telling her that just in the last couple of months, the VA has called me 2 or 3 times. And I'm going, why is the VA calling me, right? I think I've done something wrong. But they are calling because they are concerned. They're concerned about my medical health. So I returned the call, and that's what I found out. Do you want this medical package that we have to tell you about all the medical services that are available to you? Well, sure, I want them. Send them to me. I'm not so sure I want to use them. I may want to use them, but I want to have it available so I can tell other people that, hey, this is what's available. And what I really thought was great about the VA, they called me to make sure that I got the package. I go, this is service, right? They called me. Miss McAdams. They actually said, Miss McAdams. Miss McAdams, did you get that package we sent you? I go, yes, I did, and it was very helpful. Thank you. I'm probably going to be using. Not that I am not using VA services, but it was just the fact that they wanted me to know about some other services that I'm sure you're probably going to discuss. Maybe someone in here is going to discuss medical services and sexual assault, which I am not going to cover. But they wanted to make sure that I knew what was available to me. So vast opportunities. So here's my first challenge. I had a false start in 2003. So I actually retired in 2006. But the end of 2003, I was thinking, okay, it's time to retire. I was at the end of a duty station. But then my life said, what is the goal? This right here, this picture, you cannot imagine what that emotion is all about. But that's me, and that's my only son. That's the favorite. You do everything for the children, right? That's the favorite son. I only have the one, but he is the favorite. But what was the goal? I had to remind myself when I got ready to get out, what is the goal? I started interviewing for jobs because we want to live in Atlanta, Georgia. I had already taken him on college tours. We decided, hey, I had told him that when I got to this was Memphis, Tennessee. I was doing recruiting. I was in charge of all of the Navy's recruiting. I was the operations officer. So I was not the admiral in command, but I was the operations officer. So I had all the responsibility for making sure officer and enlisted goals were met. And I kept thinking, you're worried about the military's goal, the Navy's goal. What is your goal? What is your responsibility? And I had to tell myself, you told this young man that you would let him stay in one school 4 years so he could graduate. And that's important to them. That's very important. So you're ready to transition out. And I'm thinking, oh, I have all these great friends and he can stay with them. I had relatives there in Memphis. But then what I remembered was my son and I have done everything together. And he was going to be a senior, and there was going to be senior proms, there was going to be schools interviews, there were going to be applications to be done for college, and yes, we had started, but the real stuff happens at senior year. And I had a responsibility, so I had to remember that. And this right here, that's the culmination of all that went on with the false start, how best to achieve this goal right here. He is graduating on this particular day in 2009, I think this is, from Georgia Tech, because I made the sacrifice in 2003 to stay in. I decided, you know, he needs to have those 4 years that I told him. He needs to understand when you make a promise, you keep a promise. So I said, this is what I need to do. How best to achieve this goal? So how best to achieve that goal was he wanted to go to Georgia Tech. Don't care where I had taken him, that was where he wanted to go. And I'm going, okay, I don't have a problem with going to Georgia. So what happened? The Navy said, you can be an instructor at the Air Force Air War College. Wow, that is just awesome. When I got there, look at this, look at these. I had 2 classes that I put through that I was responsible for at the Air War College. This is my first class, and this is the Air Force Ball, of course. And what you don't know, under our shirts there, we had on what the Air Force calls, in the Navy, we have a different name for it, but we had on party shirts, right? The back was all made up in some type of party atmosphere that at some point when all the formalities were over with, you took off your jacket and you kind of paraded around in your party shirt. But this was where the Navy sent me. I did 1 more year in recruiting. I actually worked in diversity at that time, and I was responsible for diversity anyway, but they said, you know what, we need to do more, we need to do better. So I became the advisor to the recruiting CO for diversity. Then after that, they sent me to Montgomery, Alabama to do this job. So this is where I transitioned out after 2 years there. And this is what happened to help me transition out. Because now I've had a false start, right? I've tried to get out. It didn't quite go like I was wanting it to go. So informal group, networking, and mentoring is what helped me transition out that second time. Now, I didn't think of this informal group. This was not my idea. But this was there were a lot of us transitioning out at the Air War College because a lot of us had at least 25 or more years. And at this time, I'm coming up on 30 years, right, in the Navy. But there was a senior Air Force colonel there who said, you know, I've been talking to a lot of us, and a lot of us are transitioning out. We need a strategy group. If you all want to meet, we used to meet over lunch, and we used to talk about what we were doing to get out of the military. What kind of jobs had we looked at? Where had we gone for interviews? What was available? You know, because some of the jobs, you know, you were not interested in, or maybe you were not qualified for, but you wanted to make sure everyone else knew about those jobs. So that is what happened at that informal group. How to get your resume together. What makes a great resume for an executive type person? Because it's different than just a normal resume. You want to get everything in there, but you don't want to take a lot of time, but you've got to get it right. So we talked about a lot of stuff, and I think this was real key to a great transition out of the military. My calling with the Air Force. Love that Air Force. So then, networking. I still stay in touch with my Navy folks. This is a picture that I took with the National Naval Officers Association. It is not just a women's organization. This just happened to be the folks in this particular picture. And then I'm a member of a sorority that I pledged when I was in college. And these are all women with businesses or connections with businesses. So this was my networking besides that informal group that I had with the Air Force. What was going on in the Navy? What was NNOA doing, National Naval Officers Association? And the NNOA is made up of Coast Guard, Marines, and Navy, Sea Services. how can this organization help the Sea Service achieve their diversity in retention and recruiting and mentoring? Those are their 3 tenets. But I stay in touch with them and I work with them. And so that was one of my networking, and then this was the other one, the sorority that I belonged to, and how they helped me actually find jobs or find interviews to get out of the military. So what did I do? The reality of it all. This picture is my retirement ceremony. I kept trying to say change of command, right? Because that's all I had done was go to these types of ceremonies for changes of command. But this was the reality of it all. This was when everything that I had done with the recruiting processes, the decisions I had made, and what did I want, it all came down to this day. This person right here, me, I am not here. I'm there, but I'm not there. Because this has taken, when I decided to get out, 6 months to a year before, I really knew I was getting out when I went to the Air War College, right? But when you really start working on it, if I could have just gone to sleep that day, I would have missed that ceremony because I was tired. And that is what I saw happening to a lot of people that transition out. You're trying to keep all the balls in the air, right? You have family, you have a job, but then you're trying to get another job. I was working already in my new job this day, and I was still working in my old job this day. So I worked 30 days because I was on what they call terminal leave, but you're really not on terminal leave. You're really working your job because I was still in my house on the military base at Montgomery. I was still doing one of my jobs was 360 evaluations for the military officers that were at the Air War College. So it's the one where they do their subordinates, they do their peers, and they do their supervisors. And then we get all the information, and then we talk to them about what their strengths and their weaknesses are, how best to improve on their weaknesses and their strengths. And I was still doing that because that was my program. That was my baby, right? I was not teaching at the time, but I was still working, and I was transitioning out, and I was learning a new job that I had chosen. But these are my support structures. This lady right here was the first black female admiral in the United States Navy, and she was in telecommunications. This is Joan Turner, who graduated from South Carolina State College, the same college I graduated from. So this was my support structure, and this was my advisor at Air Force War College. He was over the Navy group that was there. So even though this was a joyous day, I kept thinking if I could do anything else, I would not do this ceremony. But I believe in defined points. I don't work in the black. I don't work in the gray. I work in the black and the white. So I figure you need to realize that you're finished with the military. You're finished with that military career. You're not going to be wearing this uniform anymore, right? You're not going to do that anymore. You are moving ahead, so you need to have a definitive point. Now, so I made that decision about a year ago, so to get to this point right here. But what you need to know is the decisions for less than 20 are sometimes no different because you have all of those things to do. And the Navy and the military allows you to go on terminal leave. They allow you to sell back your leave. They help you with your finances. But still a lot of work that goes on to get that transition done. And when you're more than 20 years, you know that there's no turning around now. Because I was at 30, and there was no going back because the Navy said, either you get promoted, Mary McAdams, or it's time for you to go home. You understand that. And I don't have a problem with that because that was my time. That was my season, right? I was ready. So what did I want? I wanted my son to finish college. I wanted to be able to pay for it. So what did I do? My new job. I'm still wearing that uniform. I go, what is your issue? I love the military. That's my issue. I love it. So I decided to do JROTC, as Lynette said in my bio. I did it for 5 years. I started out at Stevenson High School, and then I went to Southwest DeKalb for a year. And these were, JROTC really is at high schools that have students that could fall through the crack. And the military sends an officer and an enlisted there. So you have a senior naval science instructor and you have a naval science instructor. You could have 2 naval science instructors, and there are Navy, there are Air Force programs, there's Marine, and there are Army. And it just depends on the county school district as to which program that they have negotiated with and that they have, right? But this is how I got into mentoring, because I had recruited for 10 or 12 years, right? And I had talked about what we wanted in the military, what we wanted the military to look like, what the military wanted to look like, what the Navy wanted to look like. So I said, let me go back to the school district. I can see what we're growing up. And this is where the mentoring piece of me came at. But this is what the Navy didn't do. We don't march. That's the Army. That's the Marines. We PT, but we don't PT like the Army and the Marines. Okay, well, lately we PT a lot. But, you know, this was, like I said, what is this? This is what I've got to do. I worked almost every weekend in this program, because you can't take your sons and daughters out of school, right? You would not like that. Every day I have them out doing something like this. So you do it on the weekends. So on Saturdays and or Sundays, this is what we did. We did drill meets. We did, hey, I did a great job, and I'm giving them awards. And we did land navigation orienteering. This is old, dark, 100 in the morning. It's light out there now, but this is dark. We get out we leave the school like at 5 o'clock. We're at the park about 6 o'clock. The kids get ready. They go out about 7 o'clock when it's just daybreak. And they are learning skill sets of survival and how to navigate with a team and a group. And you are teaching them. I didn't know anything about land navigation, but you know what? In the military, we learn that we can learn, right? You do what you need to do to learn. And I knew that these kids wanted to do this, and that makes it all worthwhile. And that's where the mentoring comes in at, because you are mentoring them. And I have a passion for that, and that's what I'm doing now. I am mentoring now. I go, it's unfortunate that more people don't understand that mentoring process, how to help someone move from one area of their life to another, how to help them transition into a new job, how to help them move in the culture or the profession that they want to be in. But I knew that these young people, look at that smile. These are some happy kids, right? But it only took a piece of paper and what we call eye candy on their chest, right? Give them some eye candy, but they had to earn it, and reward them for it. And we say this in the world all the time, give them a pat on the back. But this is what I ended up doing, and I did it for 5 years when I transitioned out. But the other reality of that is, when I said to you, what was the best way for me to make sure that my son got his degree and we didn't break the bank getting it from Georgia Tech? Because my son got an ROTC scholarship from the Navy, because we work as a team, right? You're going to apply for this scholarship. You need to learn that process of how to go about applying for money. So he says, Mom, I'm not going to do the military. I go, well, we'll talk about that afterwards, but you need to do the application. So he did the application, he did the process, and it's a threefold process. But the bottom line is he did get accepted. So his first year, he's at Georgia Tech on a Navy ROTC scholarship. But he hadn't finished the process, and I knew the medical process would be difficult for him because he had had asthma before the age of 11. Now, my son, being the guy that he is, said he didn't have asthma anymore. He played basketball from his freshman year in high school all the way through his senior year in high school, and 2 years he played both junior and varsity basketball, right? So he doesn't have an issue. I said, Christopher, how is it that when the x-rays are done of your lungs and you're doing a pulmonary function test, you can't blow as much as air as you need? He said, I don't know, Mama, but anytime those other guys were huffing and puffing, I wasn't huffing and puffing any more than they were. I go, well, I don't know about them, but you're my child, and the doctor says you still have asthma, and there is going to be medication involved. So if you ever know about the military, the minute they put you on medication for something, that's it. You can talk about a waiver, you can try it, but normally it's not going to happen. But so that is the other reason I ended up with these young folks, because in the state of Georgia, and I don't know about other states, but when you go to that state and you work in their school system, post-secondary or college, you can get your 1-year citizen for being a part of the state of Georgia waived, meaning I could get tuition as an in-state person for my son. So Georgia Tech is like $25,000 a year, so it's like $10,000 to $12,000 a semester if you don't live there. But if you live there, it's almost chicken change, like $3,000 or $4,000 for tuition and $3,000 or more for staying on campus. But that's a lot different, right, than having to pay the whole entire amount. So for one semester, until I got out, I was paying that. But that was the other reason I decided to do JROTC. So yes, I love mentoring and I like people and I like students, but there was always an underlining mode. I needed to be a resident of the state of Georgia in order to get in-state tuition for my son. So how does this work for this particular event that we're doing today? So we have a saying, bloom where you are. They planted you, you need to bloom. You might start out looking all pretty like this, but you might want to get rich like this back here, right? Bloom where you are. The onboarding process, I think that is so key. I do not think that my school district did it well. They assumed that my naval science instructor, the enlisted person I was going to be working with, was going to indoctrinate me into everything school district-wide. But that was not his thing. I had to figure that out on my own, and I had to figure out where to go. It wasn't a negative on him. It just wasn't his thing. And the onboarding process, he had been there forever. He probably didn't even realize what was going on somewhere else, the big picture, right? His focus was those students and JROTC, and that's what he did, and he did it well. I had a Marine master gunnery sergeant. He did that well, but the naval science instructor has 3 bosses. You have the principal, you have the school district boss, and you have the Navy boss, and you have to work all of those for the betterment of your program. So I think the onboarding process is so important. I think holding environments, that is so needed. Mentoring opportunities and workshops, empowerment workshops while you're in those jobs help the military person and any person stay connected to what they're doing and why it's important and what they can do to keep themselves from falling through the crack. So we need to have that. We need to have mentoring opportunities. I prefer, even though the literature says this is not what works, I prefer formal mentoring relationships. I prefer the one-on-one, I'm helping you, I'm coaching you through, and coaching and mentoring different things. But I'm working with you as a person to get you what you need, right? You tell me what you want, I tell you what I can do to help you get there. If I can't do it all, then I show you who else can or what else can help you, right? So this to me is important, getting those mentoring opportunities available and the workshops. What happens with that climate change? The culture. What culture has the military person been in all this time? Well, Colonel Barber, what is it? It's hierarchical, right? We have been told we know the chain of command. We knew that from day one when we went to officer candidate school. We know what the chain of command is, and you're teaching the ROTC unit. We know that structure. That is what we're used to. But I found, even though I believe in my heart that DeKalb County that was where I was at, they had a school structure, but I couldn't find that standard operating procedures. I couldn't find that org manual. I kept going, how am I supposed to get a bus to get my kids to where, when? Who is the person I send this form to? Simple stuff, right? Simple. Everybody doesn't do it as clean and as succinct as the military. And somehow or another, we're thinking that they do. We think that they do because that's all we know. That's all I knew for 30 years. And even when you transition out of 4 or 5 or 6 years, that's what you know. When you first go into a command, anybody in the military can tell you this. You get a sponsor who has talked to you before you got there. They meet you at the airport or they meet you wherever you told them to meet you. They take you on a checklist all around the new job, right? It's still military, but they take you all around. They take you everywhere you need to go. They even take you out in town. Some commands have programs that they put you on a bus and they take you around to show you the town. Now, as a CO, and anybody that's been a CO will know, the real reason we do this is because we really want you to know where not to go. We will show you where all the nice, but we really want you to know. There are some places we really don't want you to go, okay? So that onboarding process is so important. So we need to think about that as we talk about what can you do to make sure someone is retained in a job that you have hired them in. Because this is what they first see, is that onboarding, that however the HR does it, that's what they see. Holding environments, I think, are very important also, because I may not talk to my boss about what is going on, right? But I will talk to someone that I trust who's my mentor. I will talk to them about, hey, what do you think about this? This happened. Did I do this right? What do you think I should do? And you get advice, and it's great advice. But that's the structure that the climate change that we're working in. We take care of our own. There isn't anyone in the military who will sit here and tell you that if they didn't have a problem, they didn't know where to go, and there wasn't someone wanting to take care and help them, even to the point of making sure their kids had shoes to put on their feet to go to school. Or that if we started PT, I remember when we started PT, because the Navy did not PT all the time. I was a lieutenant out in Monterey, California, and they told me I had to run like 1.5 miles in 18 minutes. Okay, that's not a lot, right? Don't laugh, but it was a lot for me. 18 minutes, I got to run a mile. I didn't even know how to buy a pair of shoes to run, right? Because I'd never done it. I walked, but I never had running shoes. But there are people that will take care of you. We take care of our own. The Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Coast Guard, the Air Force. We take care of our own. This new culture, it's new culture. What is it? We're kind of coming into it thinking that it's what we left, but we kind of find out that that's not the case. So these are some of the things that I think we have to think about. Even though we know we're going to bloom where we're planted, we really want to think about these kinds of things if you plan on keeping people. And I think it's what you do anyway. But don't just think because someone has a career that they know all of this stuff is happening for them at your new place. So here I am now. I am still, that's me right there. I'm still transitioning. I'm in a cohort to get my EDD, and this is us. And these are our professors in here somewhere. But this is what I'm doing now. And there's probably some research, actually I know there is, that says that when we transition out of the military, we probably don't really stay in our first job very long, because that's not what, maybe it was our calling. But my calling, I think, is to be in a mentoring environment. Have some type of mentoring going on for folks going into the military. I've always thought that young people transitioning out of high school to college and college to the military need to understand You're coming from one environment, you're going to another one. You need someone to help you through that onboarding, transitioning process. But here's what the military has given me, the foundation. They educated me. I have my master's through the military. I have some military education. I have leadership through the military. I have a great performance record, and I have professional type organizations that I belong to because of the military. So I have that foundation. But here's that last word I want to leave before I open it up for questions. The last word is, don't devalue this for your military person. Because on the conference call that I had with Lynette, someone said, oh, can you talk about maybe what happens to women that may not happen to men? This is what I would say. Everything that I have, sometimes I see with women, it's devalued. We don't appreciate the master's degree that I got from the same place that my male counterpart got that master's degree from. Why? I don't know. But it appears to be a devaluing of female skill sets because I don't know why, but I have seen it. When I did my interview for this program, I had to explain the military. And I don't mind doing that. But there were two people on my committee that understood the military. There was not a problem. But there was this one person that had no clue about the military and what the military was about and what an 06 had done in the military. And yes, I had put together a package. Yes, they had received the package. And obviously I had done well because I was at the interview, right? I got accepted for the interview. But it just took all of me not to go on the defensive when someone says to you, so what does a military degree from the Naval Postgraduate School mean? Well, so you take a step back and you explain that all of the colleges in the military are accredited by the region where they are, that all of their professors have doctorates or have expertise in the areas that they teach in. And the military people they are not called professors unless they have their doctorate, but they're teaching there because of the expertise that they have. There is a process to get into every military school. You just don't raise your hand and say, oh, I'm going to be free for 2 years, and they send you. That's not how it happens. There is a process to get into the military schools. So I just say you as someone wanting to hire someone in the military, just make sure you understand what that military is all about, what those skill sets are, because those degrees are not just paper. The people have earned those degrees that have them. And so that's my last word, understanding the treasure that you have. Because for those of us who have hired military, you know, you give them a job, it's done. You don't have to really go back and check on them to get it, to see if they've done it. So there's skill sets and there's leadership and there's education. So just understand that. So I think I'm really close to being out of town. I'm like right on time. So I open up for questions if I didn't cover something that you thought I should cover, or I left a rock unturned that you want me to talk about more. So that's the problem when you talk for 45 minutes. You probably have answered everybody's questions, or you had a question early on and I didn't wait.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Thank you.
So you talked about the retention piece, right? And so when you moved on to your new employer and you talked about some different type of workshops and different networking opportunities, what would you have liked to have seen as far as workshops that were available to you?
So I didn't know about teaching. The Navy taught me all I knew about teaching to take on that ROTC job, that JROTC job. They had training that taught me teaching in general, right? But when I got to the DeKalb County school system, a JROTC instructor has a permit. We are not certified instructors, but we are military. We look military, right, because we're in that uniform. They gave us so many jobs to do because of what we looked like. But I can't tell you that I was qualified to do those jobs. And I think that there has to be a thought process when you're asking military people, because we're probably going to say yes. We have never told. We don't say no. we're probably going to say, yeah. So I would think just some, a workshop on, for me, I needed better classroom management because everybody was not my favorite Christopher son. Oh, no. I was like, what am I supposed to do? So, you know, and I would talk to my vice principals about that. And they would say, oh, do what you do in the military. I go, oh, no, I don't think you want me to do what we do in the military. Somebody's parents going to be in here. So I think that would be helpful for the type of job that I went into. But I just think more of what I was saying earlier. Where is your standard operating procedures? How do you do your job in your department? If you gave me a book, I can read. I can get it done. I probably wouldn't even ask you anymore. I would probably figure it out and come and show it to you. Is this what you want? But what are your standard operating procedures? How do you do business? That would be so helpful. Even if you didn't give me a workshop on it, if you just gave me the book, I'd be happy.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Did I do good? Answer that?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Anything else? Come on, I know there's got to be at least one other question. Taking a picture.
So how do you feel about where your transition is right now?
That's a good question. Let me tell you, you probably saw the rest of my slides. You see this right here? This is where my son is now. I feel good about that because I made the sacrifice. I probably was not going to make flag rank because of some of the things the Navy was going through. There were many other people that were much more qualified than me to be an HR flag officer, and we were only going to have one. And when I showed you that picture of me with those female officers, well, the one on the end there, she was the one, right? So I'm happy with that. And she was in recruiting, so I'm okay with that. But this was my thing right here. So, yes, I feel good. This is my mom. This is Aunt Beauty, right, Lynette? This is Aunt Beauty. You see this? She makes people laugh. And she's probably telling them that she's getting ready to go to the dance floor at 92 and shake her legs. So I kept her for 7 years, and she just went to stay with another sibling. Yeah, so I could finish this degree because I knew that it was going to take more than I could do to manage her 24/7. And she does her morning and afternoon routine, but she likes to talk, and I am not the talker that she likes. So we sent her to a sibling that has family around all the time. So yes, I feel good where I am right now, but I'm also there because of friends. This is one of the things I didn't talk about, but these 6 young ladies here, if you are moving around in the military, you have got to have structure and foundation, somebody you can call on when something isn't going right or something's going good. You want to share something nice. But if you need something, whatever it is, I could call one of these, and they are all over the United States, but I could call one of them. I can get it done. So, yes, I'm pretty happy about where I am. Where I want to go is to do a postdoctoral type research and mentoring somewhere. I really don't care where because that's the military part of me. It doesn't matter where it is, just as long as it's in mentoring, and it's probably in the STEM program where we can show young folks how to move and transition in that STEM world, but using the mentoring process. So, yes, I'm pretty happy with where I am. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Mayor Dave Barnum, you did a 30-year career. You came out as an officer. You were a pretty senior person, a lot of experience, had a huge amount of education. You also recruited young 18, 19-year-olds coming out of the Navy, sent them to Great Lakes, watched them either stay in the Navy or get back out after 3 or 4 years. When you think about what young enlisted women veterans have to deal with when they leave the Navy or the other services, what do you think some of their biggest challenges are? Because you got to watch that a little bit, and I'm sure running the kind of retention programs and looking at transition programs.
What I found is because sometimes they don't take the non-traditional jobs, their skill sets are soft, and they are not seen to them and to an employee as a skill set that they're ready to run into. So like if you look at the jobs that are available, there's something in computer, there's something in engineering, And so that is one of the areas that I found that you had to help the enlisted people that were transitioning out, how to translate those skill sets on a resume that showed their leadership, that showed what their skills were, even if they were soft skill sets, but how that worked in corporate America, how that worked. So, and not to get downtrodden when a no, because they're not used to failure, right? They're not used to failure. So you have to help them understand that no is not because of you. It's because of the whole picture of something that's going on. But you still have this. You still have what we told you you had in the military. You still have that. And you can move on. You can go to another interview. The other thing that I found that they needed a little bit of help with, because we looked different in the military, meaning we had short hair, we have a uniform that they gave us, they told us what kinds of stockings to wear, they told us what, they even told us, what to go under the clothes, right? It tells us everything, checklist. Sometimes when I saw some of my female friends, officers and enlisted, but most of the times the younger ones getting out, they didn't know how to package themselves to look like what they knew, because they were so happy to not have to be in a structured outfit, right? Well, you don't really go to an interview with some diamond stockings on or some fishnets going every which way and your hair going up. You know, you could do that, but that's maybe a Friday night or a Saturday. Yeah, let's put this on. You need to look like this, right? Just suck it in and do this. So those are the three things I would say, sir. Anything else? Any other questions? Yeah.
What would you say is one of the most, when you're transitioning, you're trying to describe from being in the military, the skill set that you have that may not be easier for someone who's a civilian, let's say, to understand those transitioning skills? What would be the best way to describe that if you're in an interview or if you're writing out your resume?
What I would say is you need to talk to VA. They have workshops to help you. Your transitioning workshops, they help us transition those skills. And even the Office of Personnel Management has a website that kind of helps you say what those skill sets are that you have used in the military, but you need to translate them into terminology that the employer can understand. So it's not always the easiest to do, but there are places that you can go. And we get that in transitioning workshops, even though, like I told you, it was a fire hose in the beginning. I ended up paying to have my resume done. But I paid someone that was a military person who's now running the resume service. So he could help me transition my skill sets into something that was readable and understandable. But the OPM website, that's a good place to go to. Okay, well, thank you all so much. It's been a joy to be here. I'm going to be here for the rest of the day. And I do think this is a worthwhile event. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Prignon, and I'm the Director of Human Resources for the library system. And I'm part of the committee that brought this program to you today. And I would just like to welcome and introduce Renee Bobb, who is an empowerment coach, author, and the CEO of RBI Enterprise, which is an empowerment training and development firm which specializes in training in 4 areas to include financial empowerment, career development, and book publishing, and women enterprise. Currently, Renee is also working at Operation Stand Down, Tennessee, where she is the grant coordinator of the supportive services for veterans and their families. One of the highlights of Renee's career was serving in the United States Navy as a telecommunications operator. In 2012, she was named the NFL Tennessee Titans Volunteer of the Year for the work that she does to end homelessness in the Nashville community with a focus on female veterans. Renee is going to moderate a panel with Brian Leedy and Jordana Malik. Is that how you say it? Okay. So I'm going to just quickly introduce Brian and Jordana. If you guys want to come up, you're more than welcome. Brian is a senior extension associate here at Cornell University. He is the director of the military projects, working with family support programs in the United States Army, Marine Corps, Department of Defense, and the Army Reserve. Carried out through grants, the project assists military family programs and program evaluation, needs assessment, and the development of evidence-based programs to support service members and their families. Prior to coming to Cornell, he worked extensively in public child welfare and mental health programs. His current areas of interest include program evaluation and violence prevention programs in family, community, and institutional settings. Jordana currently serves as the Special Programs and Outreach Coordinator with the New York State Division of Veteran Affairs. Her responsibilities include the role of Women Veteran Program Manager for the division. She is a 12-year veteran of the Army National Guard, currently serving as an assistant operations officer with the Cavalry Squadron. She has overseas and stateside deployment experience and lives in Saranac Lake, New York with her 7-year-old daughter, Kayla. So please help me welcome Renee, Brian, and Jordana.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is truly a privilege and an honor to have the opportunity to be here. And being a veteran, I have the wonderful opportunity of being in the presence of so many men and women that have served in the military. So if you served in the military, or if you're currently active duty in the military, do you mind standing so I can give you a round of applause? Outstanding, and thank you so much for your service. When I told my mom and dad that I was actually coming and I had this opportunity to speak, my mother pulled out an article that was written about me in 1995 when I was getting ready to transition out of the military. And the article had me, I was so much smaller back then, but anyway, the article had me in my all white Navy uniform, and I was sitting behind a typewriter. Remember those back in the day, a typewriter? And the article read, Renee Bobb, single mother, active duty military personnel, full-time student, and she still finds time to volunteer in the community. And I would have to say that has been one of the core components to helping me to be able to make the transition from being active duty to actually being a civilian, actually being a veteran. So interestingly, I did not consider myself a veteran until about 7 years ago, even though I had been out of the military for many, many years. And you may be wondering why is that, even though when you're going through the transitional program and when you're on the base, they talk about being a veteran, but I never, ever identified myself as a veteran. Why is that? Because I thought veterans were someone that had to have retired from the military, someone that actually had to have a disability, someone that actually maybe was in a war. I didn't know that I actually was a veteran until about 7 years ago when I was making the transition from living in Virginia to actually going to Nashville, Tennessee. And one of my main reasons for moving to Nashville, Tennessee was I had a stronger support system in that environment. And that has to be one of the core components of when it comes to women and dealing with transition and having issues. A lot of them get out of the military in the city where their last duty station was, as opposed to actually going back to their home base. So when they get out of the military, they don't necessarily have the support system that they need in order to be able to make that transition. So I decided that I was going to move from Virginia to Tennessee. And of course, my parents were ecstatic. They were excited that we were coming into that area. But what happened about 7 years ago? The big recession began to happen. My company was booming prior to the recession, but 95% of my income was coming from individuals. When I do seminars and I do workshops and I do coaching, but everything began to change. The income began to stop because, again, I only had that one source of revenue that was feeding me. And unfortunately, the spiral began to happen. And those of you that may have experienced it or know someone experienced it, that when the income begins to stop, everything begins to fall apart. And I could not believe I'm a very well-educated individual. I'm a very prideful veteran, but myself and my 2 children as a single parent ended up homeless. We ended up living in a hotel for 89 days. And while living in that hotel, I had to take an evaluation of who am I? I'm a prideful individual. I am a graduate of a college. I'm also a military veteran. So I began to seek out what are some of the community resources that are available to help female veterans, because I had no idea any of these items existed. So I actually researched an organization called Operation Stand Down of Middle Tennessee. I went to Operation Stand Down, dressed for success. I had my resume with me, and I said, I am a female veteran. When I got there, the lobby was full of men, so it was very intimidating. But I decided to go in and get the assistance that I needed. They looked at my resume. They gave me a list of potential contracts that I can tap into. But then the colonel, the executive director of the organization, looked at my resume and said, you know what? This must be a godsend because we are looking for someone just like you to work here at Operation Stand Down. So what a great opportunity. Now, interestingly, Operation Stand Down is a nonprofit agency that focuses on working with homeless veterans. I am a homeless veteran, but no one had an idea that I was homeless at the time. I didn't carry myself that way. I didn't act that way. And then what does a homeless veteran look like? It didn't look like the way that I looked like. So anyway, I began to work there. Everything was going okay. But again, as you know, living in a hotel is very challenging to be able to pay daily or pay weekly in order to be able to stay. And because of my military pride, I was unable to share with anybody that I was going through this issue. But one person I was able to confide in, keeping in mind that 95% of the personnel that work at Operation Stand Down, they're military veterans. But I was so prideful, I didn't want to tell anybody, but I confided in one person. And she said, Renee, why don't you go to Safe Haven Family Shelter? It's a family shelter that takes in men and women and children that are homeless. So I put my pride to the side, which was so hard, and I went to the shelter. They embraced me. They gave me the tools that I need, and they allowed me the opportunity to just stop. Just stop for a moment. Put together a plan of action. And those of you that serve in the military, you know how important it is to have that step-by-step plan of action. They surrounded me with support, and then in 90 days, I was able to make the transition from being in the homeless shelter to actually into my own apartment. Stayed there for 3 years, was able to save up enough money in order to purchase a home. So what was that key component that caused me to be homeless? Was it really the recession? Was it the fact that I had so much pride that I was afraid to share with individuals what was going on? I think it was a combination of a lot of different things. I think the economy had a lot to do with it as well. So after living in my own place, the shelter invited me to come back. Could you please share with us some of your success strategies on how you made the transition from being a homeless veteran to being a success? And so I began to volunteer and travel around the country teaching individuals the step-by-step process of, number one, having a plan of action. Number two, building your support system. Because even though you're in it by yourself, you don't have to do it by yourself. And number three, tapping into all of the community resources that are available to help veterans such as myself to make the transition. In 2012, I was amazed to find out that I had been nominated for the NFL Volunteer of the Year Award for the work that I do in Nashville community, helping veterans and homeless individuals. So when I got to the awards ceremony, keep in mind, no one knew besides the shelter and that one person I confided in that I was a homeless veteran. But at this event, they invited my mom and my dad. They could not believe that I had been homeless. And then every news station was there as well, filming me as I began to talk about my experience being a homeless veteran. But the key component in that experience is that I was able to shed a light on other female veterans and other homeless veterans that are dealing with those particular issues. And so I was able to win $10,000 for being the NFL Volunteer of the Year, but I took that $10,000 and I gave it to Safe Haven Family Shelter, so now they can have another place and more resources for other veterans that are going through and experiencing some of those issues that I was able to deal with. So I say all that to say that there are three major components that I'm seeing when I work every single day with individuals that are dealing with homeless or making the transition from being in the military to actually getting out the military. One is, of course, that lack of support system, not having people there that can help you to make the transition or not knowing where to go. The second area I would have to say is tapping into all the community resources and knowing what those community resources are. And then number three, a lot of individuals tend to, especially veterans, tend to use 1990 strategies when securing employment. And how many of you know that the way that we look for employment, the way that we find jobs, the way we deal with the issues are totally different than they were years ago? So many people that are making the transition, you will find that the same issues that they had in the military, they take them with them when they actually get out the military. So I'm so glad that you guys are having this forum and opening up an opportunity to have some dialogue about things that we can do in order to be able to help the veterans when they're making the transition. I now want to invite Brian, and he has a presentation that he's going to give.
First of all, I'd like to thank Lynette for inviting me and including me in this. It's been really great so far, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the afternoon. As was mentioned, I'm the director of the military projects over in the Bronfenbrenner Center for Translational Research, and because of that, I've been invited to more or less talk about women's experiences during their military service and what veterans are transitioning from on their way back to civilian life. I'm neither a woman or a veteran, so the reason I was probably chosen was because we have done an awful lot of work with military families, and that's usually the mothers and sometimes the fathers, but it has quite a lot to do with mothers and families and the additional burdens that women bear a disproportionate amount of family responsibilities, and especially the child-rearing responsibilities. So, all transitions have their challenges, even positive ones, and I think we've heard that a couple of times already today. And men and women transitioning from the military from military service back to civilian service are certainly no different in that regard. And there are gender differences. Women experience many aspects of the military very differently than men do, and they have some very different experiences than what men typically have. But gender isn't the only thing that impacts that transition or affects that transition. There are a number of other things that are important as well. Whether or not the service was as an officer or enlisted is important to transitioning. Whether or not it was a 20-year career or 20-plus year career or just a couple of years of service before transitioning back to civilian life, I think makes a difference. It makes a difference if you were deployed to a combat zone, if you saw combat, if you have injuries or wounds that are service-related. And I also think in this day of downsizing of the military, it makes a difference if this is something that is planned and looked forward to in a normal life course development, career development, or if it's being forced by negative circumstances and negative situations. Women veterans are dealing with all of these things. And as a matter of fact, they deal with all the same military stressors and all the same military trauma that men deal with. The notion that women's service is somehow different or less than a man's service, that they don't experience the same military stressors or trauma, couldn't be further from the truth. During the last 10 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, 14% of the forces that were deployed to those combat zones were women. That's 283,000 women who were in those combat zones. And they served as military police, pilots, medics, mechanics. They served in transportation convoys. They served in intelligence. Pretty much all of the MOSs that the military has to offer, with the exceptions of infantry and those MOSs that are closely related to the infantry. And because these were wars without front lines, they were just as likely as men upon return to say that they had at least one combat experience. Now, infantry had many more than one, to be sure. They in some cases had daily combat experiences, but women were just as likely as men to say they had at least one experience where they were being shot at or having to return fire, which can be just as traumatic as being shot at. They experienced all the same risks involved in terms of all the visible and invisible wounds, and came back with all of the same visible and invisible wounds. No one in Iraq and Afghanistan was really immune from combat experience. As a matter of fact, one study indicated that women were about a third more likely than men to handle human remains during their deployment experience. The bottom line is that women experience the same war zone stressors, the same difficulties related to being separated from loved ones, and perhaps even greater interpersonal stressors associated with living and working in close proximity with other troops. Women were just as likely as men to return from deployment with the visible and invisible wounds of war. But there were differences, to be sure. And the biggest difference was around military sexual trauma. The issues of gender harassment, sexual harassment, and sexual assault were very, very important parts of many women's experiences. 3% of women reported that they were sexually assaulted while deployed. 8% reported sexual coercion. 27% reported unwanted sexual attention, and 54%, over half of women, reported experiencing gender harassment. And by gender harassment, that would be comments or suggestions or people indicating that somehow women weren't as important to the military mission, that their contribution was less or just not that valuable to the military. And the question is, why is this sexual trauma so important? First of all, it's very damaging in and of itself. Evidence suggests that women who have experienced sexual trauma report higher levels of depression, substance abuse, and health problems. And when sexual trauma is combined with combat trauma, it has almost a multiplicative kind of effect. It's more than just additive. The two work together to be especially damaging. And both combat and sexual trauma are much more severe and much more damaging if the individual has a history of trauma. Studies indicate that 1/3 of the women entering the military report a history of childhood sexual abuse, compared to only 20% of non-veteran women. And other studies found that over half of women veterans experienced physical or sexual abuse prior to their military service. This may not only indicate that women, even more so than men, may be enlisting to escape adverse environments, but it also has implications for how they respond to the trauma that they experience during their military service. Other aspects of sexual trauma that are important is that women tend to have lower perceived social support in combat zones, and we've all heard about how important that is. It's a very important factor in terms of resiliency in the face of adversity. And women have much less social support in combat zones. There's the sense of betrayal at being victimized by a fellow service member, the feeling that they're in an inescapable situation, and to a large degree they are when they're deployed, and a belief that if you report your victimization, there are likely to be even more negative consequences. So even if you reach out for help, there can be negative experiences added on. Probably the second biggest stressor military stressor for women after the sexual trauma issues is the whole issues of parenting. It is much harder to be a mother in the military than it is to be a father in the military. Women disproportionately experience all of the burdens of the family compared to men. In addition, military mothers are 3 times more likely than military fathers to be single parents, and they're 5 times more likely to be married to another service member. And dual military families experience twice the military stress as families that have one member serving. With readily available means of communication, women are much more likely to experience the dual stress of family separation and family-related concerns during deployment. They're having to deal with things halfway around the world that are going on in their families at home. I couldn't find really good numbers on this, but I know for a fact that a large percentage of deployed mothers during Iraq and Afghanistan were under the age of 25, and they had children under the age of 5. And those deployments were extremely disruptive to those relationships and required much more energy and much more work in terms of when people return from their deployment. And when you couple that with a 50% or greater likelihood of a history of victimization, parenting challenges can be pretty overwhelming, if not completely overwhelming, for women in the military. I'd like to kind of wrap up by pointing out that because women have historically been barred from combat roles, they may see the military as more of an employment opportunity than anything else. And certainly there are a lot of great training and work experience opportunities for women in the military. However, given the nature of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and their participation in large numbers in those wars, again, they are just as likely to be suffering from a number of visible and invisible wounds, which require a lot of healing. And that brings me to my final point, the gender difference that women finally come out ahead on, and that is that women are much more likely and much quicker to seek help and use services than are men. That is the good point, that everything that the VA and other organizations have available for veterans, women are much more likely to make use of those things. So with that, I'll turn it over to somebody who provides those services or links people with those services. Whoop. Oh, I forgot I had that on.
Is that good? Okay. So good afternoon. I wanted to start by sort of setting an overview a little bit and looking at some of the data. There's something called VetPop, which is the Veterans Administration's tracking of people in conjunction with actuaries and the census and lots of people that like math a lot more than I do. They've determined that in the state of New York, you've got about approximately a 900,000 veteran population we talk about. We know that women make up 66,000, so we're looking at about a 7.4% of the veterans population, which as I talk about some other issues, I want you to keep in mind. Looking at currently serving in the New York Army and Air National Guard combined, you've got 16 for the Army and 17% for the Air Guard is a women's population. Again, comparing that back to that 7.4% of current veterans. So when you look at the age distribution across New York, we know that if 100 veterans in the state of New York die, approximately 1 to 2 of them are women veterans. But if there's 100 new veterans that are coming into the state through either the National Guards or through active duty, you're looking at about 15 to 16 of them being veterans. So if you look at them as a subgroup of the veterans population, they are growing by leaps and bounds, which is something that has been noted by lots of people, the VA, Congress, Cornell University, and other places, sort of across the corporate spectrum. When the VA looks at this data, if you look at it in terms of 10-year increments, if you take the women veterans population and you look at those in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, the largest population of women veterans are those in their 50s, followed by those that are in their 30s, and then those that are in their 40s. But if you look at the male veterans population, the largest portion of male veterans are in their 60s, followed by those in their 70s, followed by those in their 80s. So it's a very different veterans population with a very different set of issues, professionally, personally, and medically. What I also thought was interesting, I like data, I don't like math, but I like data, is that if you were to take just the numbers of the male and the female veterans, New York is actually home to the 5th largest male veterans population of any state. But it's actually the 9th when you look at women, which I just thought was an interesting tidbit. So when the VA breaks down their data of services in terms of the period or the wars that they've served in, it doesn't break it down by gender. But if you just think back to the age reference, we know that our women veterans in their 30s and 40s and 50s are going to be of a more current generation of conflict versus the majority of our male veterans in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who are going to be from earlier conflicts. So the two big issues that we look at, and I'm sure you've heard, you've got your homelessness and you've got your unemployment. So in terms of homelessness, the Veterans Annual Assessment Report to Congress in 2012, for the numbers for New York, you were looking at 24% of the homeless veterans population was women. Again, looking back at that 7.4 number. So you've got an overall veterans population where women make up 7%, but in the homeless population, they're making up 24%. The reference to military sexual trauma is part of that. But what a lot of people are hypothesizing at this point also is a significant increase in domestic violence, not just in the dual military couples, but also in homes where the spouse is a non-military member, and in this case we're talking about women veterans, so it is a male, that there seems to be some kind of dynamic where there's an increased rise in domestic violence occurring in their homes. You can look at it in terms of, there was a reference to people often join the military to escape their home situation, so they're simply returning to an environment that may not have been the best environment before. There's also some people that believe that, I think it's challenging to watch your wife go off to war. She kicks ass, she takes names, and she comes home and goes back to having a baby on her hip. It's an interesting dynamic in a relationship. And it's one that a lot of people are struggling with. So that's one of the issues that they're looking at as well in terms of the homeless population. When you look at unemployment, it's interesting because the overall number shows that women veterans make up approximately 7% of the overall veterans that are unemployed in the state of New York. So you think, wow, that's a pretty decent alignment overall. We must be doing okay. But if you break down the numbers, now the Department of Labor, they don't go by tens. They put everyone into 3 categories. So you've got your 18 to 34-year-olds, your 35 to 54-year-olds, and then your 55 and over. Well, thinking back to the higher increase of male and female veterans and their ages. So if you look at that 55 and over age group, the unemployment, women make up only 3% of that group. But if you go down to that 18 and 34, you're looking at 19% of the unemployed veterans in the state of New York are women. Again, comparing it back to that 7% number, that would lead you to believe that it's a disproportionate amount, that there's additional issues that women are facing with regards to employment. In the 35 to 54 category, you're at 13%. So although overall, that can't be good. Overall, that 7% number appears to look like it's in line. If you kind of dig a little bit deeper, we're looking at that younger population struggling far more with unemployment than their male counterparts. So what are we doing about it? What is out there? What's available? So the first thing I want to take a moment to mention is the VA medical system. Good, bad, and different, black, white, ugly. I don't work for the federal VA or the big VA, as we sometimes call them in our office. But truly what they have done for women, you might not realize it, but at this point, a female veteran who's receiving health care through the VA can get her prenatal care. She can go and have a baby in a civilian hospital. That child, depending on the laws of the individual state, will be covered for up to 7 days until they're taken on by the state program that exists. But what amazes me is the lactation program that the VA has. Not only do you get 24/7 access to a lactation consultant the entire time that you're nursing, but you get a free breast pump, you get nursing bras, and you get in-house support, which is amazing. For any of you that have nursed or have had a spouse that has nursed who has tried to sort that out, it doesn't work like in the pictures so much. It is incredibly challenging, and the benefits of breastfeeding are indisputable, and the fact that the VA has invested in that. Mammograms, OBGYN care, all of that stuff is available at VA facilities. If it's not at the VA facility, you will go to a civilian provider and the VA will cover it. And a lot of women don't realize that. They don't realize what's available. Every VA facility across the nation has a women's program manager. That's someone whose sole job is to make sure that the women in that VA are getting the care that they need. The ones in New York, I have them all on speed dial. They know me well. And when women come and they tell me that they have a problem or there's something going on, I direct them to that individual. And even down to the clinics, the local clinics, should be someone designated to handle have a specific additional education with regards to women veterans and their needs. So in New York as well, there's a lot of different programs to transition. There's something called an Experience Counts, which is a governor's initiative. And the idea was that the skills that you earned in the military are somehow compatible to what you learn, whether it's a CDL, a commercial driver's license. If you've just spent the past 20 years driving military trucks, it seems a little bit silly for the DMV in the state of New York to make you take a class in CDL. So they recognize that, and you can take a waiver in your skills test. EMTs and paramedics, that translating to home health aides, nursing aides, as well as civilian certifications for EMT and paramedics. The 55C program is a state employment program that allows disabled veterans to be hired for qualified positions without taking a test. There's also tax credits for businesses that hire veterans, additional tax credits if they hire disabled veterans, and additional tax credits if they hire a veteran who's been collecting unemployment. Free peddler's licenses. It seemed like a completely random thing to me, but in a more urban environment, it's a big deal. For veterans, which allows them or their spouses the right to peddle, vend, and sell goods and wares or merchandise along the highways within given jurisdictions within the state. So there's a Troops to Energy program that sets veterans up for jobs within the energy industry. There's a Troops to Teachers program, which transitions veterans into classrooms teacher. There's a wide variety of educational programs to include the GI Bill. There's also the New York specific, veterans tuition assistance. And then there's the entrepreneurship programs and the 6%, which is a new initiative on the part of New York, which basically says that 6% of New York state contracts will go to businesses that are owned by service-connected disabled veterans. So by no means do I think that means that we've solved the problem and that we're all good to go. But there is, and as recently as March, when a big summit was held through the governor's office to really take a look at these and to draw some increased attention, it's recognized that it's a significant issue, and it doesn't, it requires additional resource to take a look at. So that is pretty much my presentation. Here we go. And I was told that I'm supposed to ask if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, we're gonna open up the floor to anyone that may have some questions for either one of our panelists. Yes.
I had one question about the business for veterans, the entrepreneur program, and you said disabled veterans. Do you know what that definition of disabled is? Is it by percentage? Is it something else?
So it's determined by the VA as service connected or through a medical discharge in the National Guard or the reserves.
So if you were 10% disabled, would you qualify, or would you have to have some other percentage of disabled?
No, 10% for that specific programs in terms of being able to bid for government contracts in the state. 10% is sufficient.
And then I had another question. Because I was asked to talk about what I thought might be different with men and women when they're transitioning out. What might be some of the concerns in your research and your studies? Can you talk to that? Because I just gave what I thought I had seen as far as devaluing military skill sets that women had, but the men could have the same ones. Can you talk to that at all?
Well, not really, because women really are in just about every military job that there is, with the exception of combat is something that's very, very new. They've only recently been allowed to participate in the infantry and the combat MOSs, but and when they were in Iraq and Afghanistan, they were doing all of the things that men were doing, and they were experiencing pretty much all of the same things that men were experiencing. On top of which, there's that issue with the sexual trauma, which I think explains a lot of the homelessness among women veterans. I think it's, especially when you add a history of victimization and then that kind of experience in the military, and then you tend to transition out in kind of a totally aimless, what next kind of a, and I think that explains a lot of the problems.
And then those skill sets that they had in Afghanistan and Iraq, when they put them on a piece of paper called a resume to get a job, do you have either one of you or three of you to talk about, is it appears to be the same weight given to those skills, male to female?
Could I
Yeah.
talk about that? So I don't have data, on that. So I want to caveat, anecdotal versus universal data. But I think that generally speaking, our society is a lot more comfortable sending its fathers off to war and welcoming them home than it is their women. And I think that when you add the concerns, forget being in the military, we know that women don't have representation in the workforce the same way that men do, especially in management and leadership positions. There's lots of different reasons, about why, but I don't think that, based on my experiences, that my military service or my National Guard service was seen as an asset. I created a resume that had absolutely no reference to my military experience in any way, shape, or form when I went looking for jobs in a new community. And then at one point, I was pregnant. I was in the National Guard, and I was looking for a job. No one in their right mind was going to give me a job. They figured I would never be there. It didn't matter what sort of qualifications that I had. So I don't think that women feel comfortable enough, in a sense, in their community, in their environment, and whatever they're doing with their military service and how it's perceived, to be able, you talked about women devaluing. I would agree that they do, because I don't think that it's received from our community and from our society very well. I deployed from a very small upstate New York town, and I was shocked at the number of people I mean, so, 10 years into the conflict, it said, oh, you're the first person I've met who's deploying overseas. And I thought, how is that possible? But, so there was those comments, and then there were those that said, well, do they really make mothers go to war? That someone would ask that question?
Right.
So I think that it's as much about, women veterans in terms of owning what they've accomplished as it is about our community and about our society being open to receiving them. I believe that I'm judged very differently for my overseas service than my male counterparts by my community and by the people around me. And I feel that. And, some's probably in my head. I'll own that, no problem. But I think that there's also a very different perception of how our communities and how our corporations see a woman who goes off to war versus a man who goes off to war.
Women who have served are far, far less likely to identify as veterans than men who have served.
Yeah. We see that as the state. We're constantly trying to reach them. We look at the data and we know that they're out there somewhere. And we recognize, a Women's History Month event on a college campus will probably have more women veterans attending than an event held exclusively for women veterans outreach at a VA facility.
And one of the things we had to do at Operation Stand Downs, we had to change the question. We would have these surveys where we would ask, are you a veteran? Are you a veteran? So we changed the question to, have you served in the military? And when we asked those questions, we were able to, recruit and do better outreach to get the female veterans to actually come in and get some services. So, well, we're out of time with this session. I'm now going to invite Ms. Emily Franco to come up and introduce our next group of panelists. Thank you. I say your name right?
Yes, you did. I'm just going to change the name.
Hi there, I'm Emily Franco. I'm with the School of Hotel Administration. I'm also the co-chair of the Veterans Colleague Network Group. So thank you all for being here today. This is kind of exciting. I'm very pleased to introduce our next two panelists. Maureen Casey leads JP Morgan Chase's efforts to develop and implement a comprehensive firm-wide strategy to assist members of the military, veterans, and their families, particularly in the areas of employment, housing, education, and philanthropy. She oversees the firm's Office of Military and Veterans Affairs, which drives, among other initiatives, the 100,000 Jobs mission, a commitment with other companies to hire 200,000 veterans by 2020. Her previous positions include Senior Vice President with Giuliani Partners, LLC, the global consulting firm of New York City's former Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, and Deputy Commissioner for Policy and Planning in the New York City Police Department. In addition, Ms. Casey spent more than 12 years working in New York State's criminal justice system, including simultaneously serving as General Counsel to the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services and as Counsel to the Governor's Director of Criminal Justice. Ms. Casey received her JD from SUNY Buffalo's School of Law and a Bachelor of Science magna cum laude from New York's College at Brockport. So welcome. And then Dr. Kenneth Matos is Senior Director of Research at Families and Work Institute and serves as a member of the senior leadership team. Prior to joining FWI, Dr. Matos worked for the Department of Defense, where he developed, implemented, and analyzed surveys of members from the U.S. military, their families, and related constituencies. His research for the DoD has examined issues of racial, ethnic harassment and discrimination, mentoring, and work satisfaction among military members and DoD civilian personnel. His work has been presented to Congress and various military police offices. He has co-authored book chapters and research papers on best practices in diversity management, the effect of mentoring in the military, and the impact of deployments on military families. And again, welcome. So we're going to have Dr. Matos start.
Easier to do it from the podium.
Hold that, I think.
Oh, perfect. So, hello everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'm here to talk a little bit about the employer perspective on incorporating veterans into the workforce. And so at the Families and Work Institute, we do a variety of research projects and other efforts to understand the on-the-ground experience, not just of veterans and employers, but of people and their work and personal lives, their lives on and off the job, and how those integrate into each other in a way that creates success both for themselves and for their organization and for all of the different constituencies they serve. And so today I'm going to talk about some of our work and findings around effective military to civilian transitions. So quick overview of statistics. We've heard a number of these throughout the day, but to visualize some of what Jordana was talking about, we can see how when we look at veterans overall between September 2013 and September 2014, we see some improvements in unemployment rates. We see that mirrored in amongst male veterans. When we look at female veterans, we don't see that same improvement. General issues affecting veteran transitions to civilian employment. I think there's aspects of the transition that are universal, that happen to men and to women, some of which will be experienced or perceived differently. For example, I've had both male and female veterans asking me, should I even mention my military service? Should I be hiding it? Should I be presenting it? But how that might be experienced as an issue for them personally, how it ties in together with their various gender stereotypes and expectations and the things that they struggle with as men or as women, that experience may differ. In addition, there can be the other things that apply as to how other people see them as men or women with certain experiences. So to sort of sum up some of these big pieces that we've seen, some of the things that we have had people looking for advice on is translating military resumes into civilian skill sets. A lot of military work really isn't that different from the civilian workplace, but they call it by very different things. The language is very different, the hierarchy is very different, but the work is fundamentally the same. It's a bureaucracy as large as some countries. So it's not surprising that they can then adapt to a corporate bureaucracy. They just call it something else. Developing civilian job search skills and networks. The military is very regimented, very structured. You kind of know what you need to do to get to the next place. The civilian world is very unstructured, very unformed. You have multiple employers with very different perspectives on how they construct things. You also don't necessarily have a civilian work network. You may have civilian friends, but most of the people who you've been working with are also military. So when you try to say, well, where's a good job, you kind of end up a little bit stuck in other people who've had military experiences as your network. We see this in other diversity groups, such as Latinos who have language issues, where they can't get out of a very small population of a network because they're looking for very specific connections. So developing that broader civilian job search skill and network is important. Creating and branding veteran supportive workplaces. A lot of organizations don't know what they're supposed to be doing. They want to do that, but they just don't know what it is they're supposed to do. And so they don't necessarily know how to create the workplace, and even the ones who do create it don't know how to get the word out that their place is a good place to work. Bridging military and civilian culture gaps, I think, is best exemplified by a story of a person who worked on the Hill that was telling me about a veteran who came to work in their office and as one of his responsibilities had to answer the phone that very high-level senators and other politicians would call in on. And he'd received a complaint about this employee that he was very brusque and rude on the phone and just didn't give these very important people the respect they deserved. And so, surprised by such a accusation, he approached the employee in a very open way and said, tell me about how you work when you answer the phones. And he described the importance of having to get the information, get the person connected, and get himself out of that circle, because something important might really be happening. Just as he'd been trained in the military when people's lives literally sat on how quickly he could connect speaker to listener. And it blew his mind to realize, you're not being rude, you're absolutely respecting them, just in a way that they don't want to be respected. They want you to pamper them. They want you to recognize their name and talk to them for 2 minutes before you transfer them, because that tells them they're important. And then he did that. And so what was happening was a break in what was the expectations between the two. But had he not approached it in a very open and engaging way, he never would have realized what it was that was causing the problem. And so getting those assumptions of civilian life and military life on the table and figuring out what is the expectation and saying that clearly is one of the gaps both the military and the civilians have, because the civilians don't necessarily know what they're supposed to be doing either. Finally, another big one is connecting recruiters with military talent pools. A lot of recruiters just don't know where to go. They don't have good brand recognition in military communities to be able to get recommendations or have people send potential employees to their sites. And figuring out how to connect to any minority population has always been a struggle for many recruiters. And so that's another place where the military is needs some more support in sort of making sure that those links are clear. Quickly, when asked what was the greatest challenge they had in finding a job, first off, the recession, not surprising. Everybody says that. But afterwards, you see explaining how their military skills translate, being able to describe what they've done in a context that they're new to before they've even seen the inside of that organization is a challenge. And then a variety of other things we've talked about. Competing with candidates who are in the workforce longer, lacking particular sort of education or certifications that now the VA is helping veterans get recognition for. Employers think veterans don't have adequate skills or they don't understand they're insensitive. I know that I've had a number of conversations with people where I talk about military skill sets, and the first thing is, well, they don't need to shoot a gun in my office. And having to sort of stop that process and remind them again, like, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on, is also really important. Often they don't mean it in a malicious way, but it's a willfully ignorant way that you sometimes have to stop and re-examine. And then they often are like, oh, you're right, that doesn't really make much sense. Issues affecting women veteran transitions in specific. We've heard a lot of this throughout the day. Some research has shown that women veterans work more hours than civilian women, but get less pay than their military veteran equivalents. So they're kind of stuck in that perfect storm of the skill sets to have access to more male jobs and all the things that come with the assumption of, well, you're just going to work until the work is done and there's no sense of family or other life, but we're still going to pay you like a woman. Active duty women are 3 times more likely to be divorced, which means more single parented and opportunity for work-life conflict. Now, that's not a question of quality of parenting. That's just the difficulty of having to go through all the things when you have to be in multiple places at the same time. Complex medical arrangements. So, for example, the VA doesn't provide family care, so for the children after that initial period after birth. And so not being calibrated to support the family means the person who's responsible for the family has to figure out, well, where are the kids going to live? Well, I'm in the center. Or where is their health insurance going to come from? And that's just an extra layer of bureaucracy and time that needs to be navigated. Now, again, these are not unique to women in that only women experience them, but it is disproportionately a female experience because women tend to be primary caregivers. Employer challenges in hiring veterans. So from some other research where the employers are talking, many of them say there aren't really any problems. I'm not certain whether that's a reflection of a lack of insight or if it really does just happen to go a lot more smoothly than people think on average. And then we have some significant other problems. Skills mismatch, education mismatch, I think, again, is a lot about conveying the connection in a way that makes sense. So, examples of veteran supportive employer policies. So the core of what I want to present is organizations that are getting it right, at least in some particular aspect of how they're managing their people and their policies. What I'm going to talk about comes out of our When Work Works Award. This is an award where we look at employer policies and employee experience regarding workplace flexibility, benefits, and other qualities of the workplace experience and how that supports both personal and professional life. In there, in a previous year, I think 2013, we asked a number of companies to say what it was they were doing for their military populations. Since then, we are going to incorporate for our 2015 cycle an ongoing spotlight on veteran supports that employers are providing and trying to draw more of what I'm about to describe on an ongoing basis. So, variety of things that employers can do. One of the first ones is enhancing their employee assistance programs. So this includes specialized supports for problems unique to veterans, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, stress around caring for a veteran, military unions, and subsequent deployments. Cornell, our glorious host, and my alma mater has its own example of restructuring its faculty and staff assistance program to include counselors who have special training in issues facing veterans, including PTSD. And I do want to point out that PTSD is not a necessary or unique aspect of military experience. There's sadly, many people in the civilian population who are dealing with PTSD. And so when you create these kinds of policies, it's important to integrate them so that they seem universal. The military population that I've worked with has always been very sensitive to feeling singled out, feeling like something special is being done for them. They value their stoicism, they value their strength. And so it's important to present this as people, not veterans. People struggle with a variety of things in their lives, and we're providing our people all these different supports. And where I'm not telling you about this program because as a veteran you're going to have PTSD. I'm telling you about this program because anyone might have PTSD who comes into my office and works for my company. Financial well-being support includes pay advances, no-interest loans, financial advice or planning to weather changing circumstances and establish a firm financial foundation. Capital One, for example, does a disaster recovery grant that allows people to apply for not loans, but actual grants to keep their economic security intact so they can weather a storm and not suddenly find themselves in greater debt than they were before. So it helps a lot of people just sort of bridge those two spots when something really hard happens. Workplace flexibility is something that we do a lot of work at Families Work Institute, and it provides a variety of options. Just allowing people to talk about and restructure when, where, and how they work in order to be more successful at their jobs in their home is valuable across the board. But veterans confronting complex military benefits processes or seeking treatments or just readjusting to child and elder care responsibilities after a deployment all have great value out of these programs. And so, as you can see, Booz Allen Hamilton, one of our applicants, offers job sharing, flexible scheduling, part-time employment, child care services, all to veterans returning from deployments. They can better manage their responsibilities along with their other employees. Additional leave beyond FMLA and USERRA is another big advantage. Those are times set by law, not necessarily by a person's needs or the organization's capacity to offer time. And so being able to look at those benchmarks, fulfill the legal obligation, and then say, does it make sense for us and for this employee to give them a little more time, to perhaps structure that post time in a different way, is also an advantage. Homefront healthcare provided an employee whose son was injured during military service an extended leave, and other employees donated their time in order to accommodate that leave. So the employer didn't find themselves with a cost burden, but that employee was able to finish. Childcare support, so employer-supported childcare is another great advantage, especially for the women veteran population. Veteran Affairs liaisons and departments, so Columbia University in specific employs a Veterans Affairs officer to help navigate all that paperwork. So having one person who figures out what you're supposed to fill out can be really helpful and dip time off of lots of people. Phased transition, so we've heard of phased retirement. Phased transition is phasing in. So people may have to wrap up family issues, therapies, or other things when they return. And so being able to phase into work is another opportunity to make that transition less traumatic and more functional for everyone. Civilian training and military talent. We talk a lot about how we need to support veterans or do things for veterans. You know, civilians need some training too. So, for example, helping the recruiters be better seekers and judges of military talent. What we have here are 2 military job skills translators. Click on that and you can look up different roles in the military and see what that roles, responsibilities are translated into civilian terms. So it really helps both a recruiter and a veteran write a better resume. Engaging with active duty members. One of the things that's really important is being able to tap the military community as a whole rather than trying to grab a whole bunch of individuals at random. And so being able to do work on the bases before transition is actually very advantageous just to get your organization recognized as a place that they should be looking at when they leave. Relocation support, especially as was mentioned earlier, since many veterans are married to other military people. When that person has a deployment, being able to move your career is also really advantageous. This applies both to women veterans as well as military spouses who may find that their careers are disrupted by accommodating the deployments of their spouse. Veterans resource groups are another option for veterans within the organization to speak to one another and come up with solutions and opportunities. Active inclusion of women's voices. I think as I've said to some of the people at the table I was with, men often aren't privy to some of what's going on. And so having women on the decision-making body to be able to say, this is what's happening, this is what we're experiencing, as well as to have them in the branding is really important to making sure that that organization is recognized as inclusive. Sponsoring and staffing women's events, veterans events. Our next speaker will be talking a great deal about what JP Morgan Chase is doing. But they've been really invested in this area. And finally, some next steps from employers. More opportunities to build civilian and military partnerships. Expand focus on development and retention. We spend a lot of time on recruitment, but not on keeping. Unify with other diversity efforts without losing sight of community-specific concerns. I think the documenting of today's solutions for the future is also going to be really, really important in order that your organization will have this knowledge for the future. And finally, I just want to show you this website. This is a place where you can find veteran resumes, as well as get military career transition, job fair schedules, and other ways of connecting to the military community. I think you'll probably get a copy of this presentation, so if you have any questions, you can contact me there.
It's going to be available.
And I'll turn it over to Maureen.
Thank you very much.
Do you mind putting the microphone on?
And you'll all be getting a report that has a lot more detail on those examples after the session.
There you go.
Thanks. Thank you, and thanks to everyone at Cornell for the opportunity to be here. As you heard when they read my bio, I went to law school in Buffalo, undergraduate school in Brockport. Was born and raised up near Saratoga. So anytime I have a chance to spend a little time in the real upstate New York, not Westchester County, if you ask most New Yorkers, it just is great to be here. So I very much appreciate that. I'm going to spend a few minutes just kind of giving you an overview of what JP Morgan Chase is doing, not just around veteran employment, but around our entire Veterans Initiative, only because I think it helps to set a context that we are one corporation of many that are trying to bridge that infamous civilian-military divide. And when Jordana was talking earlier about her resume and the fact that she crafted it so that there was no indication of her military experience, it is painful for me as someone who has been working not just at JP Morgan Chase, but with a lot of other companies to try and change that mindset for not just women veterans, but for all veterans. I recently hired a Army captain, and when I was interviewing her, I noticed the same thing, that she did not put anything on her resume about her deployment experience. And not only did she twice deploy to, once to Iraq, once to Afghanistan, but also was a civil affairs officer in Africa, and she led the team in Africa. There was no indication of that on her resume. And when we got talking about it again, she said it just got so hard to try and explain. And so I agree with what was said earlier that, when we think about the civilian-military divide and the fact that 99% of us have not served, we do bear some of that responsibility to learn about your military talent, learn about your military experience, understand the difference between guard, reserve, active duty, retired, separated from service. I mean, there are, I have most of the people that are part of my team have prior military experience, and sometimes it is overwhelming to sit in a meeting with them when they start talking about the abbreviations and all of those kinds of things. But I'm hoping I will persuade you that, as my husband says, I'm coachable, and that I have learned, and if I can learn, others can learn as well, that there is a place for those with prior military service in corporate America. Just a little bit about what we are doing at JP Morgan Chase and what our focus is, and also why I think we have been successful and what I see as the critical success factors. At JP Morgan Chase, for us, it is all about the veteran and his or her family and positioning them for long-term success. And it's probably one of the greatest battles that I fight within my company, is that we have to stay focused on the veteran. JP Morgan Chase, like many other companies, is a for-profit company. So some of my colleagues get focused on the business and not necessarily on what we're trying to accomplish. And so for us, it is about staying focused on the veteran. If we stay focused on the veteran, what they need, we'll get to the right solution. Just a few of those critical success factors, I believe. We can't be successful without leadership focus and commitment. And from the top of our organization down, the fact that I have a team of 12 people that are focused on this every single day at JP Morgan Chase is indicative of our leadership's commitment to our military veterans and their families. They have dedicated resources to this effort. So not only do I have an operating budget, but across all of our organization, there are resources dedicated, whether it's in HR, whether it is in our lines of business in terms of marketing and other kinds of things, all dedicated resources focused on our veterans. We are a business, so we have to have a comprehensive data-driven strategy. I need to be able to demonstrate actionable results each and every day so that my leadership knows that we are making an impact on what we're supposed to be doing. We cannot be successful without partnerships within the firm, across all of our lines of business, or external to the firm. I spend a great deal of my time building relationships, whether it is with the military, whether it is with the VA, whether it is with the Department of Defense, whether it is with the Department of Labor. You have tremendous resource here in General Barno and his colleagues at the Center for New American Security. We need to be building all of these kinds of relationships and partnerships to inform our strategy and to drive our results. And we, first to admit we don't have all the answers. So one of the things that we did is to form an external advisory council comprised of all former military folks. And you'll see we have 2 women that are part of that group because we knew it was important for us to be informed on how and what the issues were facing our women veterans. Our areas of focus. You heard that I worked for former Mayor Rudy Giuliani. One of his famous lines was, if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. So we had to look at, we knew we couldn't be successful if we tried to tackle everything. And we looked at where we could leverage both our footprint and our areas of expertise. And so we are focused on employment, housing, and education. And there's a carryover into the work of our foundation, the JP Morgan Chase Foundation, and our philanthropic efforts. There is dedicated funding for nonprofits that align back to our key priority areas. And I will tell you, that is not to say we've heard a lot of conversation today about some of the issues that I'll characterize as health and wellness issues. Please know that by virtue of the fact that it is not a priority area for us, that we don't appreciate that there are significant issues, but it is not necessarily something that we have the expertise to deal with. We've made sure that our EAP programs and our benefits providers have that necessary expertise, but it is not something where we thought that we could be most impactful. This just kind of gives you, in 3.5 years, we've really made some tremendous success, had some tremendous successes around the work that we've done, primarily in the area of employment, whether it is through the creation of the 100,000 Jobs Mission, which I'll talk to you about in a moment, or our own internal hiring efforts and some of the external work that we're doing. And I think that, you see there at the end, upcoming JP Morgan Chase launch of an innovative program to bridge the civilian-military divide that we are doing with General Barno and Center for New American Security. We fully appreciate that within our company and within our communities, because veterans and their families are coming home to our communities, that we need to do more to address those kinds of issues. So we're very excited about that opportunity that's coming. And my colleague from Nashville, we have a partnership with Tim McGraw on our Home Awards program, so we're really influencing the country western sphere as well. So on the employment side, I think the one thing that it's important to remember is that there are a lot of companies out there who are looking specifically at veteran employment issues and trying to figure out what works and how we can be most helpful. And I agree with the statements that have been said earlier about it's not just about sourcing and hiring military talent. It's that once they come on board, how do we make sure that we retain them for the long term? And so 3.5 years ago, we launched the 100,000 Jobs Mission. It started out with 11 companies and a commitment to hire 100,000 veterans. We achieved that first goal 7 years ahead of schedule at the end of last year. And we've grown, and so Jamie Dimon challenged us to the next 100,000 hires, so that's where we get to the 200,000 by 2020. But what's most significant, I think, about the 100,000 Jobs Mission is that we've continued to grow the coalition. And I'm trying to see the number up there, 176 companies. One more, from the time these slides were done on Thursday to today, 2 more companies have joined the coalition. So we are up to 178 companies, all focused on a single issue, which is veteran employment. And a subset of that is employment involving women veterans. And all of these companies leave business competition at the door. There are other financial institutions that are part of the 100,000 Jobs Mission. We have multiple airlines that are part of the 100,000 Jobs Mission. We have multiple retail companies that are part of the 100,000 Jobs Mission. All of them leaving business competition at the door to say, here's how we can source, hire, engage, and retain military talent. We bring these companies together twice a year to talk about leading practices and then to also talk about some of those other issues that are affecting our veteran employment programs, whether it is post-traumatic stress, whether it is bridging the civilian-military divide, all of those kinds of things that will make our companies more culturally competent, if you will, understanding military talent and how we bridge that divide. There is a website, it's jobsmission.com. There are leading practices that are on that website, and also all of the companies that are part of the 100,000 Jobs Mission, their profilers are there, so it's a great resource for veterans that are looking for employment opportunities. You have 178 companies that have committed to hiring veterans, so I would encourage you to start there. When we talk about the working groups that are focused on military employment, Guard and Reserve are one of those, Wounded, Ill, and Injured are one, Military Spouses and Women Veterans are one. Again, bringing different companies together to figure out how we can share leading practices and accelerate the success of all of our programs. Just a moment about some of our other programs that we're doing at JP Morgan Chase, and I'll circle back on the women employment issue in a moment. On the housing side, we're essentially, I would say, at both ends of the housing spectrum, one on homelessness and one on home ownership. And strategy for 2015 will have us tackling the in-between there, if you will, in terms of more independent or sustainable housing. But the firm made a commitment 3.5 years ago to award 1,000 mortgage-free homes to veterans. We partnered with 3 nonprofits to do that. The nonprofit, I select the veterans and match them to our homes. We've provided over 700 homes so far. The number up there that is always most meaningful to me is the fact that living in those 700 homes are more than 1,000 children. And so we are providing this stable home environment so that these veterans can now focus on education, employment, their health, and their families. And we also provide grants to the nonprofits. You heard the talk about wraparound supportive services. All of these families, many of them have been wounded. They're first-time homeowners. They might be working or facing other challenges. And so these grants provide the nonprofits with the opportunity to provide that support services for a 2 to 3 year period after they're awarded the home. You see the results on our Community Solutions campaign. 30,000 of those 100,000 homeless that were moved to more stable housing were veterans. On the education side, for us, we believe that higher education, whether it's vocational, community college, 4-year schools, education will be a pathway to greater employment. So we've done a couple of things in that regard. One is to provide over $1 million in grants to 7 colleges and universities that have high student veteran populations. The idea is for those colleges and universities to create programs that will keep veteran students in college longer. Although the data is somewhat hard to come by, the dropout rates for veterans using their GI Bill benefits is a little higher than non-veterans, and so we want veterans to stay in school. Just anecdotally, we're just starting to get some of the first quarter's data in. The grants were just awarded the first part of this year. But we had one college in Florida that had 75 veterans that were on academic probation. They started a special program for these 75 veterans, and already 75 in the program, and already 50 of them have been moved off of academic probation, and they're working with the last 25 right now. So we know that there's going to be some good results coming out of that. And more importantly, we're going to create a leading practices document so that we can share these leading practices with other colleges and universities that might be interested. The other thing that we've done is we've partnered with Syracuse University first to co-found the Institute for Veterans and Military Families, which is focused solely on the post-service life course of veterans and their families. And they have very quickly become the thought leader in this space. But as part of that support, we have funded the Veterans Career Transition Program, which is a facilitated online learning program where veterans can, and their spouses, can go online, take one of 30 different industry certificate courses, take the tests, get their certificates, all in an effort to improve their employment positions. You see the numbers there on our philanthropy. The firm has made a very significant commitment to nonprofits, both what we've done since 2011 and our commitment going forward, and then a very dedicated program to military spouses, appreciating the fact that they too might need some additional support and services. So a little more on what we're doing. I think we've all heard enough about the, I don't mean to sound, that didn't sound right, but we've heard a lot about the statistics and facts, so I'm not going to spend time covering that. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing. As you see, JP Morgan Chase has hired 23% of our veteran hires have been women, which is actually at a higher percentage than they're represented in the military. And I would like to say, you know, we have a dedicated team of military recruiters who have one of their jobs is that if you apply for a job at JP Morgan Chase and you indicate that you have prior military experience, we did the same thing in changing our profiles as well. You're contacted by someone at JP Morgan Chase from our military sourcing team within 5 days. And our team of military recruiters then sort of, I say, help to triage those that are applying for opportunities, because I think it's really important to ensure that we spend a little bit more time on the front end helping service members find the right fit in our organization. And so we've created this dedicated team and focused really on working closely with all of our lines of business to find the right fit. We're focused on the entire employment continuum, as I mentioned previously. So it's about sourcing, hiring, and then engagement as soon as they come on board, and then how do we retain them for the long term. So we survey all of our new hires within the first 60 to 90 days to understand what their onboarding experience is like. And I will tell you that at JP Chase, I think we're so focused on recruiting and hiring that we have not put as much time onto the post-hire experience, and we're changing that now. But these surveys have been very informative for us in terms of impacting that strategy. You've heard about business resource groups. We have a very engaged veterans resource group at JP Chase. We have over 4,000 veterans, or those that come from military families, that are part of our employee networking groups. We have several training programs that we have developed at JP Chase around bridging that civilian-military divide. So we have a training program for our line of business recruiters and hiring managers. We call it Military 101. A little bit about each of the branches of military service, about culture, about pay scale, what's the difference between being enlisted, officer, warrant officer, all those kinds of things, again, that our military take for granted. We also have a course called Body Armor to Business Suits, which is for our newly hired veterans. I tell the story all the time that although I am not a veteran of military service, I come out of law enforcement. I was at JP Chase a few weeks working on the development of the strategy. Somebody said to me, have you socialized this strategy at the HR table? And I said, if I did, I didn't know I was doing it. So I don't know what that means to socialize a strategy at a table, but you tell me what I need to do and I will do it. The other thing is matrix management. It was referenced earlier today about, we come from the military is very command and control. You know who your boss is, you know what's expected of you. In the world of what is JP Chase, I have someone that I have a straight line to, and I have about 6 people I have dotted lines to. And the whole idea is you tell me who's on first, and I can figure out how to play the rules. But it's coming to work in a corporate culture is very, very different. And so we felt that we had an obligation to teach them the rules of the game, because we know once we teach the military the rules, they will outplay us all the time. I talked about, one of the things in terms of some of the specific programs for women, the Institute for Veterans and Military Families at Syracuse has an entrepreneurship boot camp. One of the things that they learned as they started the entrepreneurship boot camp was that they weren't getting a lot of women participants. There was a reluctance for women veterans to go into a classroom setting with their male counterparts. So they started one specifically for women. They haven't had as many of them as they've had for men, but JP Chase sponsored the first one that was in New York City in June. And, I was fortunate enough to be able to spend the entire weekend there and to see not only the substantive programs that they were able to provide for 200 women veterans, but also just to see the networking and the bonding that took place for all of these women veterans, many of whom said it was the first time that they had ever been in such a location where it was totally focused on the unique challenges and needs of women veterans. So great stuff going on at Syracuse there. We've done some work with the Army Women's Foundation and some of their training programs. We have, as was mentioned, workforce development events 2 years in a row with the New York City Mayor's Office, and then at John Jay College this past June. The idea was to create an environment where, we started seeing that women weren't coming to regular hiring events. Women weren't coming to some of the workforce development events that we were doing. So we decided to create events that were dedicated just to women veterans. And, we have had overflow crowds at each of these 3 events that we've done, and certainly have every expectation to continue to do more. And then, the other thing, and we keep going back to this civilian-military divide, but I don't think that we can overstate it enough, that we need to educate those of us who have not served. So one of the things we do at JP Morgan Chase, anytime we have the opportunity, which is to bring military talent before the financial women's associations or other sorts of industry groups, the commercial bank does a host of events for their clients. And so we're always looking for opportunities to talk about what we're doing, how we're doing it, the benefits of the business case for hiring veterans, or just raising the awareness for these transition issues. So, it always, as I said when I started, pains me a bit to hear that we've been actively engaged in this for 3.5 years, and fully appreciate that we still have work to do. And I think the greatest challenge for all of us, veteran or not, is to sustain the momentum that we've seen over the course of the last couple of years. I get concerned that as the drawdowns occur, and of course who knows what's happening with the Middle East right now, but that there's this perception that the war is over, the troops are coming home, and that therefore there isn't a need for this work that we're doing. And I would submit that really it's just beginning, that we as more and more are transitioning out, and some are transitioning out involuntarily, so that we still have our work cut out for us. So with that, thank you again for the opportunity, and happy to answer any questions.
We have a couple of minutes. We'll open the floor for a couple of questions.
Cornell live feed. The first one is, in transitioning from military to civil work, is there a generational difference between the different age groups to be mindful of as a recruiter?
Can you repeat that?
In transitioning from military to civil work, is there a generational difference between the different age groups to be mindful of as a recruiter?
So, at least from my perspective, I wouldn't say it's necessarily the age group. I'd say but it would link to the years in service. So there's going to be a big difference between trying to find the right fit for someone who has done, one tour of duty 4 years in the military versus someone who's done 12 or done 16 or done 20 or 30 years. And how do we in the private sector try to find the right fit for those folks? And I was telling the story earlier to someone, I'm working with right now, a lieutenant colonel who's, after 22 years, his expectations about where he should be in the private sector, it's tough to meet those in his first civilian job. So I think that while I would say it's more about the nature of the military experience and how we create the right fit for them in our companies.
Another question for you directly. This one is for JP Morgan Chase. Who are some people others should target for their external advisory council?
Dave Barno. Seriously, so I believe that, there's a lot of really strong folks that are out there who have successfully bridged, who have successfully transitioned. I think that it's important to get military spouses. I think it's important to have someone from an enlisted rank as well as an officer rank that are represented. I think it's important to get Guard and Reserve representation because their challenges are different than enlisted's. I think, obviously, women, it's important to get that representation and to get spouses. I think, those that have done a lot of research in the field can certainly inform our program. So I don't have specific individuals, but I would make sure that you get varied representation also of the military branches too, because, we tend to go with, the Army is so much bigger and the Marine Corps, but the other military branches need to be represented as well. So diversity.
And the last question, what should male allies do to support women veterans in the classroom or workplace?
I think that's actually one of the biggest questions that a lot of people have when they're dealing with gender issues is how do you be an ally when the act of speaking can be eating up the space that the person is trying to exist within. So I think a lot of it has to do with really thinking about how you make use of your resources and privileges. So thinking about making sure that you create space for other people to speak is actually a really big thing, especially in classrooms. Men are often taught to sort of bully their way to the front, and we don't realize that there's other people who are taking different strategies. I think also simply asking what somebody thinks themselves. Don't make them the token or the speaker for their group, but ask them about, like, what is your experience? And I know there'll be many other experiences that might overlap and be similar, but that would give me some more perspective in how to talk to everyone else I meet about their individual experiences. So I think that's actually one of probably the most important things, because it lets them speak without having to take on the burden for all women everywhere.
Excellent. And do we have anybody in the room that has a question for our panelists?
So you've obviously done a lot of education of your workforce, but do you still find climate challenges for people who are non-veterans in dealing with the veteran population now?
Absolutely, and I think it goes back. I was reminded of your statement and thinking about that exact thing. If we remember that 99% of us have not served, and Jordana was talking about the fact that when she was deployed in her community, she was one of the first women that other people knew were deploying. And because the less than 1% have served, and of that 1%, many of them are families, right? So General Barnow's sons all served, that they tend to, refer to the family business, right? And so it's a smaller and smaller circle of people who have that kind of experience. And so I think that what we have seen, particularly within certain sublines of business where we have a lot of young managers who haven't had that kind of exposure to that kind of experience, they don't know how to ask the questions, and so they tend not to ask any questions, and it creates this barrier. And so one of the things that we talk about, whether it's interviewing or new supervisors who have that might have military talent on their teams, is that you can ask an open-ended question like, oh, I see you served in the military. How was that for you? And so just that simple, and if it was a good experience and the service member wants to talk about it, great. And if they don't, you're going to get that feeling right away. But I think that we work very hard at JP Morgan Chase, not just around the hiring, but just military awareness in general. So, for example, we have someone who when he started with us in August, he's a fellow as part of the Secretary of Defense Corporate Fellows Program. So he's working with us for a year. And he had just started with us in August. He found out in September that he was being promoted to colonel. And so we conducted his promotion ceremony at JP Morgan Chase, and we live streamed it across all of JP Morgan Chase at large. And people, you could see people stopping, watching this ceremony. People don't get exposed to that. Bringing different military speakers into our company, recognizing military birthdays, just trying to raise the awareness that there's this very important part of our population, our military, that are amongst us already. We have thousands of veterans who didn't self-identify until we started this effort a few years ago. And so I completely agree. I think we have more work to do, but when Jamie Dimon is talking about it in his shareholder letter, when he talks about it at town halls, when we get other lines of business recognizing folks for their volunteer efforts with veteran organizations, it will all start to happen. But yeah, I think, JP Morgan Chase is no different than most large corporations who are trying to figure out how we heighten the awareness for the sacrifices that have been made, but also the value that comes to our company.
So we've been talking mostly about recruiting, but you both mentioned retention as an issue that's worth looking at, and I appreciate that identifying that as an area to move into. I'm curious though whether you have any even just preliminary insights on how female veterans do over time in the positions that they're in, partly following on the point that was made earlier on the earlier panel that the first job may or may not be the right fit. For the work that we're doing, this is a very limited result, but we have some data that suggests that in the areas that are open to them, which is a big caveat, but in the areas that are open to them, female Army officers are promoted at a disproportional rate, much more so than the proportion in the force as a whole. And so one of the questions we're sort of thinking about is how might that translate? Do you see similar things in the private sector? Does that translate into women who fit that profile being good hires for the long run and so on? I'm just interested in your thoughts on that.
So we just started, I will tell you first, trying to get at retention data in a company and HR, it's a challenge, first of all. Secondly, when you then want to get at not only retention data, but performance data that's tied to that retention data further complicates it. And so we have been trying to do that analysis just generally from the veterans' perspective. And what we've seen so far is that the attrition rates are virtually the same for veteran over non-veteran, with the exception of certain positions within the firm, which are like our call centers and sort of customer service kind of positions, which, quite frankly, I'm not really surprised. I can't see someone going from military service and then going to a call center where you're sitting at a desk for, your entire 8 hours on the job. And so we have a much higher attrition rate there than our non-veterans. But we're just starting a project within the firm to drill down to women veterans versus, their male counterparts, and then trying to do it within the confines of privacy and HR, ER, all those rules. And really the bottom line is we want to make sure that we understand if they leave, why they leave. And because not all attrition is bad. And so we're trying to understand it, but we don't have it at that level, but we're working on it. I don't know if you have.
I was going to echo your point that there's very little structure in the gathering of data on this. Companies tend to be very reluctant, A, to share that information, or B, to connect the different data sets. I would actually put it out as a call for all sort of HR issues that to build better systems would allow you to answer questions both in the veteran zone and other diversity issues all across the board. This is an ongoing place. In terms of supporting retention, I think that there's a real need to sort of think about how you sustain both their personal lives and all the things that we've been talking about in management, but also their advancement. I think one of the things that happens in our society is that entry-level jobs are no longer really entry-level. They're dead-end. You come in and there's really no connection to anything else in the organization. And I think if you're going to be thinking about retention, especially of a very go-getter, get-it-done group, there needs to be a connection between what they're doing and where they're going. If they're just on the hamster wheel, you're not going to end up with the kind of retention that you're looking for. And I think that echoes your point about the call centers.
Yep.
Excellent. And one last question? Yes?
Question, comment type of thing. As we talk about data analysis and collection of data, I'd be interested to see, since we know that when we look at diversity and inclusion issue in the general population in the United States, and we might even say globally at this time, it'd be interesting to see the breakdown after we look at veterans and women issues to also looking across ethnicity.
Yes. Intersections a big issue.
And access process, and do we make that also a priority in terms of our outcomes?
Interestingly, within our company at JPMorgan Chase, they're looking at what we're doing in the military space to drive some of their activity in the diversity space. And so, usually it's the other way around, but given the program that we've built and the dedicated efforts that we've undertaken over the last couple of years to build out this veteran employment program, they're looking in to see how they can parallel that for some of the other things that we're trying to do within the company.
I would say the intersection of identities, of different issues, is really the next big frontier in diversity. Being able to understand what being a veteran, being a woman, and being a black woman means all at the same time, rather than as separate streams, because they interact with one another. One of the things that we're doing for some of our corporate leadership members is helping them look at their data systems and think a little bit more coherently about how they should be tying them together, rather than allowing them to live in separate corporate silos, so that when you get to the point that you have a complex question, you realize that nothing can talk to anything, and so you can't actually answer any of the questions you need to answer.
We're going to round of applause. Thank you so much.